Hello, I'm the Angry Spork, taking issue with Stan Lee's DC. We are drawing ever closer to the end of our journey through the Marvel Mogul's interpretation of classic heroes, but there's one more before the big finale. Alongside Walter Simonson, Bob Wiacek, and Lee Loffridge, let's take a look at Stan Lee creating Sandman, and see if this comic brings us a dream, or plunges us into nightmare.
Cover has the title character charging forward, a strange gauntlet charged up, with a cosmic background featuring a menacing-looking figure. Whether that's his face or armor is uncertain. Kinda reminds me of samurai masks I've seen in media, but more robotic. We start in the cheeriest way possible, an astronaut just outside Earth's atmosphere detached from his shuttle. There are many ways to die, but this is the loneliest.
I wanted to take my enemies with me.
The man reflects on his childhood, too sickly to play outside with other kids, but found solace and adventure in sci-fi and fantasy stories read by his mother. He had recurring fantastical dreams about being in a strange land where he'd encounter a pixie-like woman named Milana, and a towering demonic figure that would always try to kill him. Milana would intervene and save him every time just before he woke up, but with each dream the demon got closer. His mom would assure him the stories were just fantasy, but the boy was convinced that they were real. If other worlds aren't real, why do people keep writing about them?
Why, to make soulless blockbuster cash grab sequels at the box office, sweetie. Good night.
Eventually the dream stopped, and he got over whatever illness kept him in bed all the time, but he never forgot those dreams, nor Milana. Funny, the things you remember when you're dying.
I just remembered I'm double parked.
To make up for his restricted early years, Larry Wilton, now a young man, built up his physical strength and gained an astrophysics degree from MIT. He became a fighter pilot, then an astronaut, and his present-day narration notes that, with his last minutes of oxygen, he wants to enjoy the good memories, like when he was commended for completing a dozen missions. And for some reason, that includes when his buddy fell over, his face turning purple, and died from the first case of the sleeping death. Yeah, 'cause that's good.
Sure, my friend died, but I met the hottest woman ever at his funeral. She turned me down, but the food at the service was great.
The strange affliction started spreading, with people falling over in the streets and others desperate to stay awake. But it seemed like the illness was striking when they were awake anyway. I guess they pass out and then die, but anyway, no cure was found, but at least that cheery and trustworthy fellow, Reverend Dark, is offering to help the afflicted. Sheesh, why not just send a representative instead? He looks like he should be voiced by Steve Bloom and is most sinister sounding. 32 patients suddenly woke up and started attacking people, only for them to be shot down by police, and no new cases were reported afterwards. When a green mist is sighted in space, some think there may be a connection to the sleeping death, so NASA is sending a mission to investigate. Shouldn't that be sending a mission team, or something like that? It just sounds off to me the way it was written. Anyway, Larry is put in charge of the mission in a modified orbiter, and the day before launch, his second-in-command, Brian, takes him to the Church of Eternal Empowerment, which is apparently bigger on the inside than it looks on the outside. How can that be? Just shows what faith can do, man.
Faith and specially painted walls to screw with depth perception. Those Roadrunner cartoons were a real inspiration.
That's when Morgana Le Fay approaches. She doesn't identify herself here, but with the remarks that she looks like she's shooting a Victoria's Secret catalog, I think it's a safe bet that it's her. When a different man in the church collapses, Wilton goes to tend to him, forgetting about Morgana, but noticing a strange shadowy figure briefly. Unfortunately, it's too late. The sleeping death claims another victim. Le Fay starts coming on to him as the body is wheeled away, but despite her skimpy outfit, he doesn't care for how they disregarded a dead man, so leaves, which ticks her off, though Brian stayed behind for some reason. The next day, the mission is go and the shuttle launches, everything going dandy until they detect an external fuel leak. Larry goes out to fix it and hears what sounds like fighting through his radio. Then his tether is cut and the ship blasts away, and he hears one voice above the others, Brian, with the crew begging him not to do something. and I'm betting it was whatever made the ship go explode. The shockwave sends Wilton into a mysterious green mist that doesn't look green at all in these panels, and with his dying breath, which is a lot longer than you'd think, he notices it somehow seeping into his suit.
When this story started and Larry began his flashbacks, we saw the shuttle in the background intact. Now he's talking about its destruction in the past tense. I guess stuff just kept happening while his life was flashing before his eyes, and he decided to make that part of the flashbacks too.
As his descent takes him past a very large and familiar-looking tree, Larry is curious why he's falling at all and not floating in space, and how he can breathe when he ran out of oxygen. He hits the ground, but barely feels the impact. Instead of being handed a harp and a halo, he's approached by the same peculiar animals in the same world he dreamed of as a child. Someone warns him to run away as he's carried off by a winged being, while a different menacing figure attacks with an energy staff. Larry runs for it and is subsequently chased by the self-proclaimed Thief of Souls, while the ground behind them crumbles away. It was worse than a dream. I'd fallen into a living comic book.
Believe me, there are far worse comics to fall into.
He's abruptly joined by Milana, who's gone from pixie to full human woman size with hair long enough to give Starfire a run for her money.
Dink, look what happened. You broke your house. You're humongous.
Their pursuer grabs her and Larry immediately attacks, letting her escape, though the thief soon overwhelms him. Fortunately, Milana uses her magic wand to do away with their enemy and saving the promised one. Not sure why she didn't try that before, but now they jump from the crumbling ground to another island, where Milana creates a peak where they can converse more privately. Being the oracle round these here parts, she explains that in their realm is the power to bring people dreams, both good and bad. Nightmares have been used to try and weaken mankind, and have influenced the more evil individuals throughout history. Attila the Hun, Jack the Ripper, Adolf the Numbskull, etc. Bestowed with some enchanted new threads and the power of the Chosen One, Larry becomes the Sandman, a name he instinctively declares for dramatic effect, narrating that he now realizes he's not insane, and that this is all really happening.
One of the repetitive things throughout these Stan Lee stories is that most of these characters, once they get their power or experience something unusual, they always fall back on, maybe I've gone insane, which kind of makes you wonder about the average mental health of people in this universe. But by now, since we've had Superman, Flash, Wonder Woman, Batman, and others pop up and become rather newsworthy, you'd think that people would be a bit more open-minded when this stuff happens to them.
Explaining that his gauntlet's gem contains sand from Dreamworld, which will be the source of his power, Milana adds that she knew from his boyhood that their destinies were intertwined. Larry gets pretty flirty, but he's told that's fine for his earthly form, but not as Sandman. In the distance, clouds of danger begin forming, a sign that someone called the Demon Lord is assembling an army of captured dreamers from Earth, and it relates to an approaching crisis. The villain resides in the Ebony Tower of Nightmare, awaiting to kill the Chosen One.
Ebony Tower of Nightmare? No one tell this world's Dinah Drake, otherwise she'll start kicking innocent dream creatures and lobby to get Milana evicted from Dreamworld.
The Oracle shows Sandy how he can turn intangible, and he keeps flirting, even after she reminds him of the gravity of the situation. Even then, he's up for fighting the Dream Lord, but he keeps hitting on her, wanting to get to know her luscious lips, and expecting her to wait for him while he's gone.
Really, dude? You know your situation is real. You're not dead, you're not crazy, you're not dreaming. She has rebuffed you so that you would focus on the matter at hand, yet you still insist on hitting on this woman? I thought Len Lewis was creepy, but like an astronaut, you decided to take that to new heights.
The big bad and his army are headed their way, with his magic stronger than Milana's and Sandman not ready to face him. She tells him to grasp his gem and recite a chant, and after some snark, he does so, falling back into space where he left off. He's taken to a waiting shuttle, which I guess they had on standby, because they don't explain how long he'd been gone. He still has his gauntlet, which is proof for him that what he experienced was real, but he passes it off as a carnival prize. I, for one, would be asking which carnival, but moving on. He gets a hero's welcome and made up a story explaining how only he survived. Though we don't know what that story is, but the people in the comic book buy it. Sleeping Death cases rose up again, but Larry wanted to know more about the Church of Eternal Empowerment, sitting in on a sermon by Reverend Dark to maybe find out why Brian sabotaged the mission and nearly killed him. When the preaching is done, Morgana tells Larry that the Rev wants to see him, so the astronaut asks if he remembers his second-in-command. Dark evades the question, preferring to know about the gauntlet he wears, but it zaps him on contact. Despite saying previously that Wilton was important, Dominic kicks him out.
He was just too embarrassed to admit he thought it was a Ben 10 Omnitrix story. Turns out Dark's a really big fan and is missing some things from his collection.
A leisurely stroll through a park to clear his spinning head sees a citizen turn purple and fall over. But Larry, now working on magic and sand mojo, sees a Dreamworld demon try to remove the man's essence, and orders him to stop, which really surprises the creature, but probably not as much as a blast from the gem that causes it to vanish, and the life essence is returned to the victim. Unfortunately, passers-by only saw Larry lunge at a man on a bench and assumed he was attacking, and a quickly forming angry mob chases him into an alley. Thanks to his intangibility, he loses them, and they scatter to cover more ground, and hopefully not recognize him as a recently returned sole survivor of a space mission because conspiracy theorists would eat that up. In comic books, the hero always seems to know what to do, but this wasn't a comic book.
It was a graphic novel, hardcover, with a foreword by the author and retailing for $29.99.
Wilton goes to sleep and immediately returns to Dreamworld as Sandman, and the place isn't looking any more hospitable. After a short jog, he sees the Dream Lord's castle, feeling drawn to it, and hoping Milana was there.
Hoping she's trapped in there for you to rescue so she'll fall in love with you, because this is a fantasy and all that? Or do you hope to maybe bump into her in the evil gift shop?
Between him and the foreboding castle, however, is a sea of souls pilfered from Earth, and wow, I'm surprised it hasn't been reported as a full-on pandemic. That's easily a country's worth of people right there. Milana arrives to tell him to leave, because he's not likely to hold off their attack, the one they're launching right now, which looks like an actual wave.
In America, Aquaman is a person made of water. In Dreamworld, water is made of people.
As instructed, he recites the verse and returns to the physical world, just in time to see Reverend Dark's goons try to throw his body out a window. His ectoplasmic form hastens back in time to turn intangible and avoid becoming a cement smear. Fortunately, this is LA, not New York, or we might have a crossover with the Ghostbusters. Deciding it's time to strike back, and still possessing many of his magic powers, he flies back into his apartment and confronts the would-be killers, who are understandably confused. One pulls a gun, but Larry holds him at bay, demanding to know who sent them. Just as he's about to speak, the gunman begins melting away into nothing, until only his medallion is left. Larry lets the other one leave in a fright as he inspects the token, which unsurprisingly bears the image of Dark's church, where he heads on the next page. Don't know what Dark has to do with the dream world, but there's a tie-in somewhere.
Knowing comics, several tie-ins, a lot of boisterous promotions, and the promise of shattering the status quo for years to come.
The church is deserted, save for the murdered corpse of the second assassin. He gets a call for help on his gem from Milana, doesn't want to waste time getting to her, so he decides to hide his physical body inside a disused cabinet.
If anyone finds you, just try to make yourself look like an elaborate Tupperware set. It probably won't work, but at the very least it might be funny to watch the attempt.
Unfortunately, it's a trap. When he returns to Dreamworld, he finds that the Dream Lord somehow faked Milana's distress call, and with an army to back him up, Sandman tries running. Unfortunately, he's not getting anywhere. Just like the dream he had as a child, he's on a treadmill, one which the villain picks up after transforming into the form we saw on the cover in an attempt to devour the Chosen One.
This is the exact reason gyms always refuse him membership. Well, that and picking his teeth with the free weights, that's just rude.
The only chance left to Sandy is to go intangible through the Dream Lord's hand, but once he hits the ground, the army advances. Acting instinctively, which is happening a lot in this story, he focuses his gem and turns the ground to quicksand, consuming them, but that still leaves the big guy. And I've pretty much exhausted my bag of tricks. Well, that'll happen when you get 2 minutes of tutelage, most of which you spent hitting on your instructor. The ground beneath him falls away into what looks like an actual lake of fire, with DL doing the standard villain boast before his big attack to end it all. In this case, enough fire to turn his magic sand to glass and shatter his essence, so that the Chosen One's legend will no longer give hope to the oppressed. Because I guess that was a thing? But that's where instinct comes back into play, for maybe the 10th time in under 40 pages. Sandman grasps his gem, and his flesh and blood turns into a sandstorm. Even though this has been referred to as his ectoplasmic essence, not his physical body, but I guess old Lair just really likes being dramatic. Anyway, Sandolph the Green engulfs the Dream Lord, likening himself to a dust devil.
At first I thought this was a reference to another comic book character, maybe a really old and obscure one, but turns out dust devils are actual weather phenomena. And while there are occasions where they can be pretty damaging, most of the time they're actually quite harmless. So, at least to me, it doesn't seem like calling this a dust devil really fits the kind of power it's supposed to have.
The enemy lies in pieces, and Milana is suddenly there. So was she trapped inside the Dream Lord's metal body, or what? In any case, she says he must now bear the Sandman's mark, which involves some facial pain while he gets a new tattoo around his mouth and cheeks.
Ah, my face!
And that's truly what makes him Sandman, somehow. Now to the matter of the Sea of Souls. It seems a hefty task until the Oracle in his arms offers a vague reminder of his power. Again touching his gauntlet gem, he creates another dust devil that gathers up the souls, just as the Dream Lord's castle is overtaken by a dark cloud. Rather than some enormous event or cataclysmic catastrophe, Crisis is instead a singular entity, and Sandman knows he ain't gonna stop him all on his lonesome. So he flies past its gradient red lightning attack while reciting the magic words, returning to the physical world with the souls that immediately return to their bodies.
Which strikes me as a little odd. In some of the previous cases of the sleeping death, like Larry's friend at the beginning, they died immediately. It does seem a bit confusing that having one's soul or life essence removed by dream demons kills some, but apparently leaves others catatonic, and no explanation on the ones that woke up and went bonkers.
He returns to his body in the cabinet, and somehow Milana's there too. Not sure how, but fortunately he doesn't make some crack about being cramped inside there with her. And he weirdly calls the place the Church of Everlasting Empowerment, which for the 12th story is kind of an odd typo. They find Dark unconscious on the floor with a knife. They move his hood and see the face of the Dream Lord. Don't know why it was necessary to wear a mask while trying to kill a sleeping dude, since up to now he just wore a hood that shadowed his face. Anyway, it's reasoned that the Rev was acting as the demon's avatar, and killing him affected Dark before he could kill Larry's physical body. Our hero decides to leave him there, betting that he's powerless now, and wants to better understand his role as Sandman. Milana is eager to help the Chosen One, but he wants her to like him as the man he is, and maybe get her some actual clothes, because that Vine not-quite bodysuit is going to attract some attention. But there's an explosion nearby, so no time for clothes shopping. Now that Crisis had come to Earth.
And he's apparently singing soprano. Maybe performing for a global audience has always been his dream.
On the street is much shorter this time. A disheveled-looking man finds himself in Dreamworld and hunted by the demonic creatures that inhabit it. He's actually surprisingly aware of Crisis and Sandman, who narrowly saves him, and the old man wakes up on a park bench. This has apparently not been the first time he's been dream-chased, and the next snooze could be his last. He decides to start calling as much attention as he can get, telling people to stay awake lest they become slaves to Crisis. He runs into the street, and not even getting hit by a car stops him from delivering his warning as the shortest of these short stories ends.
So that was Stan Lee's Sandman, and I can honestly say this is the weakest story so far.
We have another destined Chosen One element, but this guy is equal parts bland and creepy. The creepiness we've covered, constantly hitting on his dream girl. And in general making a lot of cracks that aren't as charming as I think they were intended to be. Aside from that, he doesn't seem to have much of a personality. He's kind of like one of those all-American characters you'd see in movies from the 40s and 50s. Sure, he'll do what's right, but he's pretty uninteresting while he does it, mostly because he doesn't seem to have a personality outside flirt. Most of his powers are activated by instinct, which has been seen in other stories, but not quite to the amount done by Larry. It's like Stan couldn't think of a way to show him learning his powers in order to win a later conflict based on skills or resourcefulness.
The narration kind of felt inconsistent to me. At first it seemed like he was reminiscing with minutes of oxygen left, and it felt like it was going to lead to a present tense narration, but it just continues with past tense throughout the whole thing. There were also times it felt kind of contextually vague. The way it was told, I thought the Thief of Souls and the Dream Lord were two different villains.
That being said, I did think the art was good, and I enjoyed the fantasy element vibe I got from Dreamworld. Then there's the surprise that Crisis is the name of a person rather than an event name, which is a nice departure. There's not so much to say about the On the Street segment, other than how did this guy become so familiar with the intricacies of Dreamworld, and when exactly was there time for Sandman to save him there, since this clearly takes place before the end of the main story.
Perhaps that was a minor oversight, or maybe there will be some manner of explanation in the final installment next week. Personally, I'm not going to put any money down on that. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.